What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a comparison between the Visible Midnight and the Motorola Moto G Power 2021. Now, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. And if you want to learn more about either of these phones, be sure to check out my full reviews and tips and tricks videos for them as well. But with all that being said, let's get started. So the Visible Midnight has a 6.52-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 269, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. We got a water drop notch up here for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels. Overall, despite the viewing angles not really being the greatest, I do think this display is pretty good. It's large enough to the point where you're going to get a good experience for casual content consumption. So if you're streaming a video here and there, maybe reading something, it is going to turn out pretty nice. And we got a tall and narrow form factor, so you won't have to scroll too much when you're reading. And when you're watching videos in landscape mode, it's going to get a nice cinematic look. Now with the Moto G Power 2021, we got a 6.5-inch IPS LCD with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 266, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So we got the same kind of thing going on here. The display is definitely large enough for content consumption, so it's all going to look pretty good on here. But I will say, if you look really close, I do have the brightness at 100% right now, and the Moto G Power 2021 is a little bit brighter and the colors look slightly better. The image is also a little bit more sharp, I would say, although it is really close, so it's not that huge of a difference. The viewing angles are also a little bit better with the Moto G Power 2021, so definitely keep that in mind. If you're outside maybe in sunlight or something like that, it's going to be a little bit easier to see with this phone than it would be with the Visible Midnight. Now with the Moto G Power, we got a hole punch front-facing camera right up here. And this camera is also 8 megapixels, so not really a whole lot of a difference. Although I will say the front-facing camera on here looks a lot better since I'm not a real big fan of water drop notches. As far as the overall design goes, both of these phones are pretty well built. Neither of them are too bulky, so they'll be pretty comfortable to carry around. For both phones, the buttons are nice and solid, which is nice because a lot of entry-level phones have rather flimsy buttons. Both phones have more of a matte finish on the back, but you can see the fingerprints a lot more on the Visible Midnight than you can with the Moto G Power 2021. I also like the silver color and the wavy finish the Moto G Power 2021 has, whereas it's a little bit more bland and kind of boring with the Visible Midnight. And in general, in terms of overall appearance, the Visible Midnight just looks like your standard issue entry-level phone, whereas the Moto G Power 2021 has a more modern, kind of sleek look. Now for storage, both of these phones are getting 32 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion. Although the Moto G Power 2021 does have a 64 gigabyte variant as well, that is not the variant of the phone in my hand. But all the same, 32 gigabytes really isn't a whole lot. Even for the average user, you're probably going to go through that pretty quickly, unless you're doing almost nothing on your phone. So I definitely recommend getting a microSD card for both of these phones, so you can offload photos and videos and stuff like that, but still nothing really beats having more internal storage on the phone. And in this day and age, that's becoming more and more important, with the system, apps, data, all that kind of stuff getting larger and larger. But at least with the Moto G Power 2021, since there is another variant, you may be able to get one with 64 gigabytes instead of 32. Whereas with the Visible Midnight, you don't have that option. Now obviously, since the Visible Midnight is a visible phone, and that's the only carrier it's going to work on, I'm assuming that no matter what, you're going to be getting a phone for that carrier. And I'm not 100% sure if you can get the 64 gigabyte variant of the Moto G Power 2021 with Visible, but I will be leaving links to both of these phones in the video description in case you want to check it out. Now another interesting feature the Visible Midnight has that the Moto G Power 2021 doesn't is wireless charging. That's really not something you see every day in a phone that's not a flagship phone, so that's a nice advantage the Visible Midnight has over not only the Moto G Power 2021, but the vast majority of budget phones as well. So if you do have a wireless charger, and that's a feature that you want to use, you definitely can use it with this phone. Both these phones have face unlock and fingerprint scanners right here on the power keys. So let's give them a try and see how well they work. Starting with the Visible Midnight. There we go, one more time. And there you go. So real fast and responsive, no issues here. Moving on to the Moto G Power 2021. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So they were both pretty fast and responsive. In the case of the Visible Midnight, I would say exceptionally so. But with the Moto G Power 2021, although it wasn't exactly quite as fast, it's still fast enough to the point where the difference really isn't too noticeable. Now taking a look at the rear camera setup, with the Visible Midnight, we got a triple camera setup here with a 13 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera for portrait mode. With the Moto G Power 2021, we got a triple camera setup here as well, with a 48 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So overall, I would say the setups are pretty comparable. As far as the main cameras and portrait mode and stuff like that goes, both these phones are going to take real nice pictures for what they are, with the Moto G Power 2021 being a little bit better quality. But regardless, if you're going to be taking photos casually for social media or something like that, both of these phones will get the job done. Now in terms of other features, I personally favor an ultra-wide camera over a macro camera, so in that regard I would say the Visible Midnight has an advantage, and it's kinda unfortunate because the Moto G Power 2020 actually did have an ultra-wide camera, and Motorola took that away with the Moto G Power 2021, and unfortunately even with the successor, they haven't brought it back. So that really is too bad because I do think an ultra-wide camera is much more useful than a macro camera. But of course, if you really want an ultra-wide camera, the Visible Midnight is going to have an advantage. But if you'd rather have a macro camera, then the Moto G Power 2021 is going to be a better choice. Now internally, the Visible Midnight is getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio P22 processor. The Motorola Moto G Power 2021 is getting 3GB of RAM as well with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 662 processor. I ran Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and the Visible Midnight came back with a single core score of 147 and a multi-core score of 820. The Motorola Moto G Power 2021, on the other hand, came back with a single core score of 306 and a multi-core score of 1370. So there's quite a significant difference here. Both of these phones are going to be able to take care of daily tasks. So if you're browsing the web, going on social media, sending text messages, making calls, that kind of stuff, either of them will be fine, but I will say in my experience, not only is the Moto G Power 2021 quite a bit faster, but with the Visible Midnight, I had some apps crash occasionally. Now this only happened like once or twice, whereas with the Moto G Power 2021, everything I tested it on ran decently smoothly and I didn't have any issues. So if you're going to be on your phone a lot, I would say the Moto G Power 2021 is going to have a significant advantage here. But if you're just doing basic activities and really not using your phone for a whole lot, then either of these phones will be a viable option. For battery, the Visible Midnight is getting a 4000 mAh battery. This supports 10 watt fast charging. And the Moto G Power 2021 is getting a 5000 mAh battery. This supports 15 watt fast charging. So the Moto G Power's battery is better in pretty much every way, except for the fact that it doesn't have wireless charging, but that's not really that relevant for most people. So I would say if battery life is your number one priority, or even one of your priorities at all, the Moto G Power is going to have a huge advantage here. Now the Visible Midnight's battery isn't small by any means. With a 4000 mAh battery, you're still going to get good battery life, but with the Moto G Power, you're going to get way more than you need. So down the road as it starts to degrade, which all batteries do, it's not really going to affect your day-to-day life nearly as quickly as it will with the Visible Midnight. Now neither of these phones have NFC unfortunately, so if you want to use a contactless mobile payment service like Google Pay, unfortunately you can't do that with either of these phones. As far as software goes, the Visible Midnight starts out with Android 11. Now the Moto G Power 2021 technically starts out with Android 10, but it has been updated since to Android 11, so there's really not a whole lot of a difference here. So in conclusion, which of these phones is better? I would say overall, the Moto G Power 2021 is going to have most of the advantages. Although the displays are pretty similar, I would still say the Moto G Power 2021 does have a slightly better display with better viewing angles, better brightness, and just a better look in general. I do like the design a little bit more, although I will say the Visible Midnight has significantly more weight to it. As far as the camera goes, that is a close one. The Visible Midnight does have the advantage of an ultra-wide camera, which the Moto G Power 2021 doesn't have, but I still would say as far as the regular camera goes, the Moto G Power 2021 is going to take slightly but noticeably better pictures. The processor is really no contest. The Moto G Power 2021 is much faster than the Visible Midnight. and again, I think it runs a lot more smoothly. And then the battery, again, the battery with the Moto G Power 2021 is not only much bigger, but it also supports slightly more powerful fast charging. So overall, if you can get the Visible Midnight for a really good deal, then it might make sense to get it if you're not really doing a whole lot with your phone. But in general, I still would say that despite the fact that the Moto G Power 2021, at full price at least, is slightly more expensive, I would say it's definitely worth it. But once again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones, be sure to check out my full reviews and tips and tricks videos for them as well, where we go into more depth about their functionality and the value they provide. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And as always, I will see you in the next video.